This story isn't just for you, as Mama works in an office herself and I can relate to these moments. This isn't a fiction for the sake of hype, but an honest look at real experiences. All companies, names, and addresses have been changed. The goal is simple: for you to recognize yourself and not repeat other people's mistakes.
I knew something was wrong the moment Brendan laughed into the microphone and said my job title like it was a punchline. He was halfway through his quarterly operations update, standing on that little stage in the break room like he was delivering a TED Talk instead of gutting half the company. He had his sleeves rolled up like he'd been wrestling numbers instead of people, and he was holding a printed chart in one hand. My chart, actually. I recognized the formatting. I built that data set. I'd written the formulas he was now weaponizing. And we found areas, he said, grinning, where optimization wasn't just possible, it was overdue. Laughter. A few soft chuckles from the newer hires who still believed in performance reviews and beanbag chairs. Then Brendan held up a slide. Like this one. Back-end contract custodianship. $4,200 a month. I mean, isn't that enough? He looked directly at me. That's when I felt it. My hands went cold. My stomach stayed perfectly still. I didn't blink. I stood up, calmly, quietly. I wouldn't know, sir, I said, loud enough to reach the back of the room. What money? The silence that followed. You could have heard a license renewal expire. Just before we go any further, if you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, please do. It means everything to the team that brings these stories to life, and liking the video helps way more than you'd think. Thank you. Brendan froze. He wasn't expecting me to talk. He definitely wasn't expecting the voice recorder in my pocket, or the flash drive I set gently on the counter next to the coffee urn. Payment logs, I said. 31 months of retention stipends I never received. All approved. All routed. Just never landed. Someone near the fridge whispered, "Oh my God. You have to understand. No one noticed me at Halden Tech. That's the thing about doing your job flawlessly. You don't get credit. You get invisibility. I managed back-end vendor renewals, compliance timelines, license expirations, clause triggers, and SLA penalties. I was the reason our cloud provider didn't bill us an extra $180,000 last quarter. I was the reason 3 vendors stayed compliant through 2 tax code changes. But when Brendan came on board, none of that mattered. He wanted dashboards and speed and streamlined headcount. He looked at me and saw overhead. He never even bothered to learn what my team actually did. Just wrapped us in a line item and forgot to ask who was behind the initials. 6 years. No screw-ups, no spotlight. And now, suddenly, I'm the expensive one? He'd never read my contract. Not really. He didn't know I'd been offered a role at a cybersecurity firm back in 2021 after our system breach, and that Halden Tech matched their offer on one condition: I stay. The number? $4,200 a month. A retention incentive buried in an appendix, signed by the CEO, approved by legal, logged by finance, supposed to hit my account on the first business day of each month. But it never did. At first, I thought it was a delay, then a mix-up. Then I just forgot to care. I was tired. I was quiet. I was always working, and somewhere in that rhythm, I stopped watching. Until Brendan stood on that stage and made my ghost salary the punchline of his lean ops reorg. The next morning, HR called. Legal followed. Then payroll. I answered their questions with one document, clause 8.4b, and one sentence. 31 months, accrued. That's when the real silence began. Not just in the break room, not just in Brendan's face, in the entire building. Brendan didn't waste time playing subtle. The man came in with startup energy and a wrecking ball attitude, buzzwords like agility and cost hygiene clinging to his every breath like stale cologne. 2 weeks into his role, and he already had finance pulling internal spend logs going back 3 fiscal years. How much are we paying for what? He kept asking. Loud. In meetings. In hallway run-ins, during catered lunches like he was performing for an invisible audience of shareholders. The louder he asked, the more people listened, not because they cared, but because they were terrified he'd read out their name next. That's when I started seeing fragments of spreadsheets he wasn't supposed to flash in public. Printouts scattered across the table in conference room 3B, highlighted rows, some with question marks, others with angry red notes. I walked past one day on the way to refill my tea and I saw it in the corner of the page, my employee ID Hall TC 1147, and right next to it, $4,200, legacy contract reconciliation, monthly recurring. I blinked. My salary was salaried, standard benefits, modest base, no additional monthly disbursement, at least none that I actually saw. And yet, according to whatever budget Brendan was dissecting, I was a recurring $4,200 hit every month, not for my base pay, but for some supposed legacy role I'd already heard him mocking in private. I kept quiet. I always kept quiet. Until a young finance analyst, one of the new kids Brendan had brought in from his old firm, passed me in the hall and casually said, "Hey, just a heads up. Your cost profile's getting flagged in the ops cutback review. Something about you being a monthly center drain for contract cleanup?" I stared at her for a beat too long. She shifted her weight and smiled awkwardly before hurrying off. Center drain, like I was some busted sink leaking money behind the walls. That's when I pulled out the old file from 2021, my personal copy of the counteroffer from Halden Tech. After our third-party audit revealed a string of vulnerabilities that could have tanked client trust, I'd been offered a job elsewhere. Higher pay, better hours, remote option. Halden Tech begged me to stay, said they'd match it, not all at once, but through a structured retention clause. Monthly, quiet, long-term loyalty incentive, they called it. Clause 8.4b was clear. $42,900 monthly, tagged as a separate line from salary, routed through internal retention accounting. Legal signed, HR approved. I had the PDF, the email chain, even the time-stamped signature page. But the money never came. Back then, I assumed it was being deferred until the next cycle. Then we got a new controller. Then finance restructured. Then I got buried in work. The clause became a ghost. A technicality I didn't want to fight over because the war of burnout was louder than any back pay. But now Brendan was asking questions. The wrong ones. And loudly. The worst part wasn't the misdirection. It was that he didn't know he was poking a sleeping clause with sharp sticks. That $4,200 wasn't an estimate. It was a contractual trigger with compounding terms. Interest if unpaid, legal consequences if misrouted. And above all, a time-stamped path, every month tracked, every deposit expected, every absence documented through the payroll system's own back end. And it was all routed through ops, Brendan's department, which meant, if it didn't get to me, it had to go somewhere else. That's when the suspicion turned into something colder. Because misrouted retention payments, that wasn't a clerical error. That was a liability, and Brendan Leach was suddenly sitting at the very center of it. The moment he said it, I knew Brendan had no clue what he'd just triggered. We were standing in the main operations hub, a polished, open-floor nightmare with glass walls, reclaimed wood, and a row of sad-looking succulents dying under fluorescent lights. The quarterly sink. His sink. Brendan stood on the makeshift podium in a blazer that probably cost more than our annual server maintenance budget. He'd just finished boasting about savings from realignments and legacy cleanup, tossing buzzwords like confetti. Slides clicked past behind him. Pie charts, burn rate trends. Then a bullet point appeared, no name, just a line item. Back-end contract custodianship, $4,200 month. He smirked. We've trimmed unnecessary expenses across the board. We've restructured a few legacy roles, like back-end contract custodianship, he said, tapping the screen like it owed him money. Then, eyes locked on me. I mean, isn't $4,200 a month enough, right? The room gave him a few weak chuckles. Nervous ones. The kind that ripple when people don't know if something's a joke or a warning. I stood up, slow, calm, no drama. I wouldn't know, sir, I said, clear, steady. What money? Silence snapped over the room like someone hit mute. Brendan blinked. The smirk stayed on his lips for half a second longer than it should have. Then he glanced at the HR rep seated off to the side. She immediately sat up straighter, suddenly remembering every clause in every offer letter she'd ever signed. I stepped forward. My bag was slung over one shoulder, and from it I pulled a small black flash drive, walked to the front. No theatrics, just clarity. I placed it on the table beside the coffee station. Timestamps, approval logs, disbursement records, email confirmations, all showing a structured monthly retention of $4,200 I never received. 31 months. Verified absence of deposit. This is my copy, I said. Yours should match. No one moved. Someone near the back, I think from DevOps, let out a breath and said, not quite loud, but not whispering either, "Oh no." Brendan's mouth opened, closed. He shifted the slide ahead manually, away from my line item. Too late. I didn't need to raise my voice, didn't need to slam anything down. The silence did the work for me. You see, Halden Tech had been running lean for years, and back-end wasn't sexy. Compliance syncs, contract rollovers, license audits, they don't sell product. But they stop lawsuits. They avoid lawsuits, and they remember things like Clause A 84B, retention disbursement, legal penalty, interest accumulation. Brendan had made a spectacle out of me, in public, on record. But what he didn't realize? You don't mock the person who holds the receipts, especially not the kind that track down to the cent and second. The HR rep cleared her throat, clearly ready to bolt from her seat. The CFO's assistant, seated 2 rows over, was already pulling out her phone. Brendan finally spoke, but it came out clipped. "We can review this offline." "No," I said, looking around the room. "We'll review it wherever accountability still exists." Then I sat back down. Flash drive still on the table, presentation still up, and Brendan's face, still trying to remember if anyone had ever taught him what the word breach actually meant. The clause wasn't buried. It was sitting in plain sight, right at the bottom of the 3rd appendix in my 2021 contract. Clause 8.4b, bolded, bullet-pointed, and initialed by the CEO himself. The language wasn't ambiguous, no legalese fog, just a direct sentence carved like a blade into paper. Should any retention disbursement be delayed or misallocated, the firm shall owe adjusted interest and legal penalties for every 30-day period lapsed. I had 29 lapses. 29 times the monthly deposit failed to arrive. 29 emails I never sent because I trusted the machine to run as it always had. But now, with Brendan trying to laugh my invisible salary out of the budget, those skipped months weren't forgettable anymore. They were billable. By the time I got back to my desk after the town hall, I had a calendar invite from legal. No subject, just a Zoom link. They were fast. I'll give them that. By 4:15 p.m., I was in a virtual conference room with 3 attorneys, 1 HR manager, and a director of payroll whose screen was clearly being watched over her shoulder by someone she didn't dare ask to leave. The questions came fast. Are you certain the disbursement never reached your account? Have you been paid via any alternative channel? Cash equivalents, bonuses, stock options? Was there ever a renegotiation of the clause terms? No, and absolutely not. I pulled up the PDF I'd saved, the one with the digital certificate, timestamp, and initials from the CEO. They asked for a copy. I sent it. Legal went quiet for 5 whole minutes while someone on their side scrolled through. Then a soft voice finally asked, "Did payroll ever confirm the start of disbursement?" I laughed once, not because it was funny, because it was over. "They didn't," I said. "But finance has a ledger that says $4,200 left the ops ledger every month. Your own budget sheets show it." That's what Brendan was reading from. So the money went somewhere, just not to me. And suddenly, the real game began. Payroll said it was a finance error. Finance said it was an ops directive. Ops didn't say much. Brendan had already ghosted the Slack channel and stopped replying to direct messages. The last thing I heard was from his admin, who whispered to someone near the copier that he had a doctor's appointment and wouldn't be back until Friday. Sure. Meanwhile, I had the timestamps. Each month, documented absence of deposit, logged disbursement on their side, 0 receipt on mine. And that clause wasn't a threat. It was a trap. A legal mechanism that kicked in after 60 days, escalated after 180, and entered breach territory after 24 months. At 29, it was practically radioactive. With adjusted interest, calculated per clause using prime plus 6, and the compound penalty outlined for misallocation, the total due had ballooned to $186,000 and climbing. Every department scrambled. Meetings were pulled, Slack channels went red only. Someone accidentally CC'd the internal audit team on a finance thread, and that's when things hit freefall. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about where else Brendan might have restructured money. And suddenly, everyone remembered that compliance custodianship might not be such a legacy role after all. The audit team started quietly, just 2 people from internal controls and 1 nervous junior from finance. But by the end of the day, they had looped in half of legal, a forensic accountant from compliance, and someone from IT who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Because the money wasn't missing. Not in the traditional sense. It had been rerouted. System logs showed that the $4,200 was never sent to my payroll pipeline. Instead, it was automatically diverted every month into an internal ledger labeled Ops Retainer, Brendan Oversight, a dormant ledger, obscure, obsolete technically, but still active in the system. And each of those 31 disbursements stamped, digitally, by Brendan. His signature appeared beside every entry like a signature on a checkbook he never had to balance. The memo line, if you could call it that, read, "Efficiency pivots." Turns out he'd bundled my retention into what he described in his internal documentation as a discretionary fund for operational elasticity, which, when translated into human language, meant money he could shift around to make it look like he was saving costs elsewhere, not to the company, to himself. No one wanted to say it yet. But the word sat there, heavy and unspoken, in every meeting that followed. Fraud. Not just a mistake. Not a clerical error. Not a misunderstanding. A reallocation. Deliberate. Patterned. Hidden in plain sight beneath just enough bureaucratic camouflage to keep people from asking questions until it landed in the wrong hands. Mine. The real kicker? The ledger he used had been decommissioned 2 years ago. Finance never fully sunset it because it was tied to a legacy integration that no one got around to unhooking. So it sat there, like a forgotten attic door, waiting for someone arrogant or stupid enough to start stashing things inside. And Brendan? He had the key. By 11:42 a.m. the next morning, HR issued a statement. Brendan Leach was placed on administrative leave pending further review. No desk cleanup, no goodbye email, just gone. His office was sealed with blue tape, IT protocol, not law enforcement, though I'm not sure he could tell the difference anymore. The HR director walked past my desk, stopped, and gave me a look I'll never forget. Not pity, not shame, recognition. That's what happens when you spend your career being invisible, then make one move that drags half the company into daylight. And now, every document Brendan had touched for the past 3 years, vendor contracts, renewal approvals, integration budgets, discretionary funds, special projects, was under audit. They brought in outside counsel. The CFO took vacation. 2 other employees in ops were reassigned. And legal? Legal was scared. Not of me, but of the paper trail I had kept clean. Because if this happened once, then how many more times had Brendan gotten creative with someone else's clause? Clause 8.4b didn't just sit there like a warning, it had a fuse. 14 business days from acknowledgement. That was the deadline, not suggested, not negotiable. The exact wording read, once discrepancy is acknowledged by any officer of record or official designee, the firm has 14 business days to cure the default in full, or said default shall escalate to a contractual breach, exposing the firm to additional damages inclusive of class action eligibility. They acknowledged it on day 1. A soft, "We'll look into this" from legal was all it took to trigger the timer. By day 2, I had a direct email from their internal legal counsel. Not a paralegal, not a junior, the general counsel herself. Her tone was polite, urgent, and surgically cautious. We would like to explore resolution pathways. Please advise on your expectations. My expectations? $186,000 plus accrued interest, immediate correction of misallocated funds, written reclassification of my separation, and a full audit report confirming Brendan's misuse of discretionary authority. In writing. No loopholes, no silence. On day 3, HR called. Not to apologize, but to ask if I'd be open to off-the-record reconciliation. I wasn't. By day 5, I had my own attorney looped in, one who knew employment contracts, digital forensics, and corporate retaliation triggers like the back of her hand. I'd worked with her once before during a failed acquisition at my previous job. Smart woman, quiet, dangerous. I sent legal her contact. That's when things escalated. Because on day 6, I wasn't the only one anymore. 3 other senior engineers, 2 from R&D, 1 from CyberOps, reached out to me separately. I heard what happened, one said. You might want to see this. Another offered, sliding over an email with the subject line, Retention Trigger Confirmation. Brendan approval required. Each of them had been offered a structured retention post-breach, all tied to the same internal code, all routed through the ops discretionary ledger, and none of them had seen $1. Different departments, same clause, same vanishing funds. We filed as a joint party on day 7. My attorney drafted a consolidated breach notice. The moment it hit their inbox, Halden Tech's tone changed. By day 9, outside counsel was brought in. The board canceled 2 upcoming media appearances and pulled Brendan's name off 3 press releases that were scheduled to go live before the next funding round. Then came day 10. An emergency meeting was called. Not a Zoom, not a Slack huddle. A full board, camera on, NDA required emergency session. The chair issued the notice with no subject line, just an invite and a single sentence in the calendar description. Liability event in play, attendance mandatory. I wasn't in the room, but I know how those meetings go. No one talks until the money's named. And when my name showed up beside the figure, now hovering closer to $240,000 with joint claims and penalties attached, I imagined the silence was deafening, especially when the words potential class action exposure showed up on the board packet. The fuse had been lit, and now, tick, tick, tick. On day 13, they folded. The offer came through counsel. Full payment, not a cent negotiated down. My original retention balance plus compounded interest. Legal fees covered. Signing bonus waived in my favor. And the part that made my attorney raise an eyebrow, an addendum. Reclassification of my departure status to executive consulting conclusion. They didn't want a payout. They wanted an erasure. Their version of wiping the slate clean, no breach, no termination. Just a seamless transition, like I'd handed off a white paper and walked out with applause. In return, of course, came the strings. Non-disparagement, confidentiality regarding all internal discovery. No mention of Brendan, no mention of Ledger 4229, no mention of the clause that detonated their nice, tidy version of efficient operations. I signed, because the truth was, I didn't need the noise. I already had a new office, different city, nicer view, corner glass panels that overlooked a skyline not once touched by Halden Tech's nonsense. Director of Risk, Global Compliance and Audit Infrastructure, a title long enough to silence anyone who thought they understood the value of a clean internal trail. My first month was onboarding with federal regulators. Second month? EU privacy protocols across 5 jurisdictions. Real work, high stakes. People who read the fine print and knew better than to weaponize ignorance in front of the person who wrote the clause. Brendan's name never came up. Not in my inbox, not in my contracts, not even in the quiet industry channels where rumors float like smog. He was gone. Maybe repackaged, maybe hiding behind a new consultancy, maybe still trying to claw his way back into relevance. But in my world, he was erased. I kept the agreement locked away, never framed, just filed, alongside a hard drive and a backup of every month they failed to deliver what they promised. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because I understood what leverage really looked like. It wasn't shouting, it wasn't suing, it was sitting across from a table full of people who thought you were bluffing until you handed them their own signatures. Quietly dated and unalterable. Halden Tech didn't get closure. They got containment. I got something cleaner. Peace. And just enough distance to know I'd never have to raise my voice to be heard again. It came out on a Tuesday, mid-morning. No banner, no media call, no executive quotes. Just a generic PDF quietly uploaded to the newsroom section of Halden Tech's site, nestled between a vendor integration update and a photo from a recent campus recycling drive. The title, Operational Alignment Update, Q1 Summary. The body text read like it had been passed through 6 layers of legal review and 2 branding consultants. Following an internal restructuring initiative, Halden Tech's operations division has implemented a compliance-aligned payment framework to support evolving infrastructure needs. No mention of Brendan. No mention of retention clauses. No hint that anything had gone wrong. But the footnote? That's where the real signal was. Tiny text. Almost invisible. All historical retention obligations have been resolved to satisfaction. Insiders noticed, they always do, because those who'd survived Brendan's tenure, the ones who quietly watched ops get turned inside out under the guise of efficiency, knew something had happened. Something expensive. It only took 2 days before the real question started making rounds across Slack threads and lunch tables. Why did back-end cost reporting suddenly spike in Q1? Someone from finance leaked the figure, quietly. No names, just the total line. $400 in special settlements and retention reconciliations. Special settlements. That's how they wrote it off. The whispers followed, as they always do. At first, people speculated that a lawsuit had been filed and sealed, that some vendor had triggered a chain reaction, that ops had fumbled a compliance audit. But then someone remembered my name, and the flash drive, and the town hall. No one said it aloud, but the pieces were all there. I didn't need to explain. I didn't want to, because by then I was gone, already presenting at a conference in Zurich. Keynote, Retention Compliance in Decentralized Ecosystems. Not one person from Halden Tech was in the room, but 2 vendors who used to partner with them were. One pulled me aside after. "Hey," he said, nodding, "so that Halden payout, you were in that, right?" I just smiled. Let's just say I'm a believer in honoring contracts. He grinned. Didn't push. Professionals never do. Halden Tech thought a vague press release and a clean Excel line would bury the story. But you can't unwhisper a reckoning. And the truth? They didn't settle to fix anything. They settled to avoid discovery, to keep Brendan's signature out of court, to keep the clause from being read out loud, to keep the rest of the company from realizing how close they came to burning down their own house with misrouted wires and arrogance. It worked. Mostly. But the damage wasn't in the payout. It was in what people started asking next. How many other clauses have we ignored? That question didn't make the press release, but it echoed through every hallway they thought they'd cleaned. They filed it under Q2 Adjustments, Audit Reconciliation. Line 417, buried halfway down a spreadsheet only 5 people on the planet would ever read in full. No announcement, no comment. Just a small gray cell with my employee code next to a simple phrase, retention, closed, paid. No title, no role, no footnote, just closure. Sanitized, silent, and final. That was the last time my name appeared in any official Halden Tech record. They didn't reach out, didn't ask for a statement, didn't even send a follow-up survey. That's how companies move on, from people they were never built to notice. But I didn't need their version of the story, because I had already started a new one. My title now? Director of Contract Intelligence at a global compliance firm. I lead a team that builds the very tools Halden Tech didn't realize they needed. Automation platforms that scan and flag overlooked contractual triggers in vendor agreements, retention clauses, SLA penalties, and disbursement anomalies. In short, we catch the clauses that make or break a business. I teach young analysts the thing Brendan never learned. If you don't understand the fine print, you are the fine print. If you don't track the flow, you are the liability. Sometimes a vendor calls and asks if we work with Halden Tech. I always smile and say, we're neutral. Then change the subject, because I don't need to say anything. They already wrote my silence into the settlement. Still, the flash drive's in my desk drawer. The original one, labeled in black ink with a single word, proof. Not out of bitterness, not revenge, just preservation. Because in this world, you never know when someone will look at you, your value, your work, your role, and decide they can rewrite your worth on a line item and call it efficiency. And when they do, you better be holding the clause. You better have the paper trail. You better know exactly when to stand up in a meeting full of smirks and say, with all the calm in the world, "What money, sir?" Then let the silence do the rest.